expectations are better. So my name is Erin McKean, and I am a dictionary editor. And there's a technical term for dictionary editor, which is lexicographer. And so lexicographer is the word that's in most dictionaries, even like tiny little bilingual, like Hungarian, Bulgarian dictionaries, because we make the dictionaries with whatever words we want in, right? So lexicographer, we like that word, let's put it in. There aren't very many lexicographers in the United States. So most lexicographers who are professional, full-time lexicographers work for one of 5 or 6 companies, and we all belong to something called the Dictionary Society of North America. Some of us also belong to the European Lexicography Association, which is called Eurolex. There's also an Afrolex, an Asialex, a Scandalex, an Australex, and I think the Russians have one too. And an Afrolex for African lexicographers of African languages. So every kind of language continent has their own lexicographical association. And a couple of years back, maybe in 2007, I hosted the Dictionary Society of North America's meeting in Chicago, and we had 125 people show up. It was massive turnout for a group of lexicographers, and we only got to 125 because we had it at the University of Chicago, which has a huge group of people who study the languages of the Middle East, and they have a lot of dictionaries for ancient Middle Eastern languages. So there's a dictionary of Sumerian, there's a dictionary of Hittite, there's a dictionary of Assyrian, there's a dictionary of Coptic. So we had all those people bulking up our numbers. And then we had one guy who registered himself and his wife and his daughter because his grandpa was a famous lexicographer, like, you know, famous for lexicographers. He just thought it'd be a fun way to spend the weekend in Chicago. So that's how we got to 120. So basically, long short names. You may not ever meet very many other lexicographers, so would make a good impression. I have wanted to be a lexicographer since I was a very little girl, and that's unusual. Most people who work on dictionaries, they start off doing something else more sensible first. Like, often they work in publishing, in reference publishing, or in textbook publishing, and somebody says, hey, guess what, George, you have to go work on the dictionary for a while, and then they like it. But very few people start off going, I want to work on the dictionary. And so the next kind of question is, how do you know at 8 years old that you want to work? And the story is, and it's a true story because I have documentary evidence that I can point you to online, is that when I was 8 years old, I would read anything that came into the house, including my father's Wall Street Journal. I didn't read the stock tables. If I did, I'd be richer now. But I would read, like, there's something called the A head, or sometimes it's called the floating column, which is the 4th column over on the front page. And it's the human interest story, right? It's like, you know, singing dog, YouTube sensation, that kind of story. And their singing dog story, when I was 8, was that the 2nd edition of the Oxford English Dictionary was going to take 27 years to finish. And I don't know why that struck me as interesting when I was 8. I don't know how I thought dictionaries were made before. Like, I'm pretty sure that they were like hewn out of wood or, you know, extruded in some factory. And I read this and I was like, oh wow, somebody makes this and it sounds really interesting. And hey, I could probably do this. And so when I was 8, I'm originally from North Carolina. I was born in Charlotte and I lived in North Carolina off and on until graduating from high school. And when you're an 8-year-old in North Carolina and you say, I want to make a dictionary, nobody talks you out of it. They're like, if I had said, hey, I want to be a rocket scientist or a ballerina, somebody would have said, honey, that's hard. But if you say you want to be a dictionary editor, they say, you go on and do that, sweetheart. Like, there's like no frame of reference. Like, nobody in North Carolina. There are no dictionaries in North Carolina. There are no dictionaries in South Carolina, and there are no dictionaries in Virginia. So, you know, what are you going to do? So I was really lucky in that I was able to basically start from 8 and think, I want to be a dictionary editor. What does that mean? Now, there are no university programs in dictionary editing, or there weren't when I went to college. There are now some programs in Europe. A couple people teach classes at, for some reason, the state of Georgia, both the major universities in Georgia have to have classes of lexicography. But there aren't, you can't be like, I'm going to the best lexicography school in the world. There isn't one. So I ended up at the University of Chicago in part because they did have a lot of dictionary projects going on, even though they were in languages that I did not speak and still cannot speak. But I kind of perverted all my classes to be about dictionaries in some way. Like I took a class in feminist theory from Laura Berlin, fantastic class, and my end of the semester paper was how Ms. got to be in dictionaries. I think I got a B minus. I did also work on one of those dictionaries in Near Eastern languages, the Assyrian dictionary. I don't know any Assyrian. Assyrian is basically Babylonian cuneiform, but I know how to file in Assyrian because that's mostly what I did. It was transliterated into Roman characters, and Assyrian has something like 2 S's and 3 T's that are distinguished by diacritical marks, and the order that they go in is, of course, fairly important. And but they had this classical dictionary set up. In fact, the mythology is it's on the 3rd floor of the Oriental Institute at the University of Chicago. The mythology is they had to reinforce the floors for the file cabinets because these huge file cabinets full of index cards that the dictionary entries were made from. And but mostly when I was there, I filed things and I underlined manuscripts in colored pencil and shot little action figures over the rubber bands. The dictionary people are always pretty fun and kind of practical jokey, and one of the people that I was lucky enough to work for on the Assyrian dictionary collected these stories called bus plunges. They used to be in the New York Times all the time, but they're not anymore. And they would be just this little, like, 3-line story that would be like, you know, bus plunges kills 20, where some bus in some country far away went off the edge of something and 20 people died. And for some reason, it was this little trope in the New York Times of like, every time a bus went off a cliff, they had to report it because massive loss of life, it's a tragedy. But just the combination of phrase bus plunge, it just doesn't give it the heft that it deserves. And so when you line up 50 bus plunge stories in a row, like, they just look pretty absurd. So he collected those, and he had 50 bus plunge stories lined up outside his door. I think when you deal with ancient languages, everything just feels very remote. So dictionary editing, that's kind of what I started doing, and I went to the University of Chicago. I was lucky enough to work on the Assyrian dictionary, and then got a job working on children's dictionaries for a textbook company called Wordnik. If you went to school in the United States, in elementary school, and you had a red dictionary, it was probably a Wordnik dictionary. It was really fun to make dictionaries for kids. In part because when you're making dictionaries for kids in a textbook company, everybody that you work with used to be a 4th grade teacher. And they're just really nice people. And, you know, the building kind of felt like an elementary school. We had our own library, we had a cafeteria. It was actually part of my job to read 17 magazines, so I could see what words the kids were using. And I also had to read a lot of children's books, which was kind of like, oh no, don't throw me in that fire patch. Don't make me read children's books. This is terrible. It was great. It was a lot of fun. But the frustrating thing was that children's dictionaries, they're made for children, but they're bought by grown-ups. And so you have this dual market problem in that you want to please your core user audience, but the people who are putting down their cash want different things. Like, kids want naughty words. That's the first thing any kid goes to in a dictionary to look it up, and the parents and teachers are like, no way. So it's a little difficult. It's easier now, I think, that kids can use online dictionaries because they can see a lot of data about these things in a fairly safe environment. I mean, you would prefer to have them look at an online dictionary to look up these words than just flat out Google them, right? But that was kind of the first frustration that I ran into making dictionaries. I was like, I really want to make books that are fun for kids, because dictionaries are really tools. You know, lots of people treat them as cultural objects, like the dictionaries. They're shiny and big, and like, it's the word in the dictionary, that's great. But they're really tools, and if you make a tool that people don't like to use, they won't use it. I mean, think of how much exercise equipment you probably have and don't use, right? And most normal people own some exercise equipment they don't use. It's a tool, but it's not pleasant or easy or sometimes even effective to use, so people don't do it. So when I was making tools for children, it was frustrating that I couldn't make the ones that I thought that they would really like to use. And there was no budget or time or impetus to go like round up a bunch of 4th graders and say, how do you really use a dictionary? We did one survey, and we basically asked teachers, like, how much training did you get in teaching people how to use a dictionary? And how much teaching of it do you do? And the average amount of training that the teachers that we talked to got was one day of dictionary training in their whole educational career, and they did less than a day in their classrooms every year. was like, okay, well, this is frustrating. And then I had a baby, which was fun. And when I was on maternity leave, I had just finished up a whole bunch of projects where I was working, and I was told that when I came off maternity leave, I would be working on the social studies project. Like, I'm not really interested in social studies. I mean, I think it's good that people are social and we study that, but it wasn't something I had a huge interest in. And because I had never been a teacher, you can't really do any of the fun stuff on textbooks without having been a teacher. So I would probably be like fact-checking stuff. And then Oxford University Press called me and said, hey, would you like to work on our dictionaries? And I said, sure, I would really like to work on our dictionaries. And I started working at Oxford University Press, and I was there for about 6 years. And that's where I thought that, oh, when I work on adult dictionaries, all the frustrations I have with working on children's dictionaries, that will magically disappear, especially at Oxford, the most preeminent dictionary publisher in the whole world. But the frustration continued to grow because it's the frustration of not being able to develop the right tool for the job. So here I was, making dictionaries for monolingual native English speakers, monolingual adult native English speakers, which is basically the easiest group of people to make dictionaries for. You don't have to leave out the naughty words. You don't have to worry about people having low English proficiency. You can just list the words, assume that they know how to read, try to give them data. And the problem was there's way too much data to fit in a paper book. And that was really frustrating because we'd find all these great words. Oxford has a good research program. We come across words all the time, and we'd look at the book and we'd be like, I can't fit this word in, I can't fit these 10 words in, I can't fit these 1,000 words in, because once a book gets beyond a certain size, there aren't that many binderies in the United States that can bind it. It's a complete, like, archaic constraint. Once you get a book this fat, first of all, the price of the book goes up, and nobody really wants to pay more than, say, $60 for a dictionary. The people who do want to pay $60 for a dictionary, they only want to do it once. When somebody graduates from high school or college, that's when they want to buy a dictionary, give it to somebody, and not buy another one ever again until there is no other time to buy a dictionary. And a two-line dictionary, that would just be crazy. Like, the people who don't want to pay more than $60 also don't want $75 for more stuff that they don't want. And the tool was kind of archaic, and there wasn't enough space. And at the same time, I am a big geek. I like computers, and I like the internet, and I like all the cool things that you can do. And this was like in the early 2000s when the internet stopped being something that you went to the computer center on campus and like messed around with a terminal window in, and it started being a mainstream thing. And I kept pointing, like, look at that internet over there, it's awesome. Let's build stuff for that. And I think I had the same meeting every 6 months for about 2 years where we were like, all right, web strategy. We're going to get together and do web strategy. We're like, okay, how are we going to do this? And we'd be shrugging. Somehow. Because the problem is it's the same problem of the innovator's dilemma across the board. It's like making money from actual things. Oh, let's make something that will be free. How do you deal with the not making money from it anymore? So that was pretty frustrating. And I wasn't making very much headway. It was having a lot of fun, but it was pretty exhausting. And so I started going on and giving talks about dictionaries to people because I thought, well, if I can't change the tool, maybe I can change people's attitudes toward the tool. And ended up giving a lot of talks. I talked at the Art Center College of Design in Pasadena. That was probably the first talk I gave to more than 7 librarians. And then I talked at a conference called GEL in New York, which is fascinating. It's a great conference. It's a user experience conference, good experience live. And right after I spoke at GEL, the organizer of GEL, Mark Hurst, said to me, oh, I'd like you to meet my friend Chris. Chris wants to ask you to talk at his conference. And I was like, sure, I'll talk anywhere. I turned out to meet Chris Anderson from TED. And he's like, oh, I want you to talk at TED. I was like, okay. I had no idea what TED was, not a single clue. And this is in 2006, so they wanted me to talk in 2007. And I was like, sure, fine. And so I think that I finally got tipped off as to what a big deal it was when they were like, oh, we're going to fly you first class out to Monterey. I think at that point I was convinced I would be paying for my transportation. Like, usually that was kind of how it worked. Oh, okay. But luckily then TED folks, especially Chris, held my hand and were like, yeah, this is how it works, this is what you do. And so I was like, okay, fine, I have one shot to make people love dictionaries as much as I do. And gave a talk, and the minute I was finished with the talk, almost literally as I walked off the stage, someone came to me and said, oh, here's, I forgot who it was that made the introduction. He was like, I'd like you to meet Roger McNamee. He really likes your talk, he wants to talk to you. And I was like, Roger McNamee, sure. I didn't know who he was. He didn't look like an ex-murderer. He looked like a lovely man. He's in fact a lovely man. He said, my wife and I would like to have lunch with you and talk more about what you talked about. And I was like, sure, that would be lovely. I would like to talk to you. And so we had lunch, and he's like, how do you make this talk that you gave about making the dictionary outside of the book into a real thing? And I was like, I didn't think it was possible. I was just saying, wouldn't it be lovely if there was some alternate universe where this would happen? And he's like, well, let's make it happen. So we talked for about a year. Okay, how would you make an online dictionary that's not just a print dictionary projected on a screen? Like, a lot of the dictionaries that were online, they took a perfectly good print book and they just kind of HTMLized it. They didn't make it more dynamic, or they didn't make it more user-friendly. They just like, hey, a white screen looks a lot like a white piece of paper, so let's just put it here. And so we talked about it for a year, and it took several months of like thinking through all the parts involved in making a dictionary. And so what a lot of people think about when they think about how a dictionary is made, they think somebody like me, only not me, male, with a bow tie, has a very sharp pencil and sits there and thinks really hard about words and writes them down. They think that's how dictionaries are made. But in fact, dictionaries are a data analysis process. So you take a bunch of sentences with individual words in them, and you look at as many sentences as possible as kind of humanly appropriate and reasonable for each word, and you look and see what kinds of patterns do these words show up in, and then you extrapolate from those patterns to make a definition. So it's kind of like once you see 50 examples of a completely made-up word, like Google, right? Yeah, that's a fairly made-up word. But well, this is an easy one. Like English is really Frankenstein-y when it comes to words, right? So you can say that something is awesome sauce. You can say that something is awesome pants. And you know what that means because you know what awesome is, and you can get from the context that sauce and pants are intensifiers. And if I said something was, awesome weenie, perhaps if I used it in the right context, you would think that you could get it too. But after 5 or 6 exposures for a fairly transparent word like that, you would get it. A more complicated, maybe more technical word, like say fracking, right? Hydraulic fracking to get natural gas out of where it is to where we want it to be. Most good journalists, when they use a complicated word, a new word, or a technical word to their audiences, will define it in context. Because they know it's not in the dictionary yet, because it's brand new and it's a new thing, and they want their readers to understand them, so they define it while they go along. And so we were thinking about, okay, well, all the different parts of writing a dictionary entry is you take all these sentences and you boil them down into a definition, which has, it's kind of a literary form, like a haiku. It has to be so long, it has to have this structure. You can't use words in the definition that are harder than the word being defined. You can't say that foggy means smoggy and smoggy means foggy. You can't be circular. And so there are all these little rules that you have to do. And the biggest rule is be concise. Squish, 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 because you need to fit it in the paper book. And I'm thinking, okay, so first we got to get all these sentences. Well, that's the internet. That's easy. We can get data. We're swimming in data, drowning in data. And then we have to figure out how do we condense all these sentences into the definition sequence. Editorial work is really hard, and it needs really sharp pencils. And we thought, I don't think we have to do that stage. The only reason to have definitions is to have either a standard reference to what the word means, or to fit it in a paper book. Like, if we just show a bunch of sentences, that's how people learn words anyway. Like, most of the words you know in your lifetime, you don't read the dictionary definitions for at all. You only read them when the context that you found words in fails you. So if we just gave people enough context, we could get away with not writing any definitions. And we could let the big traditional dictionaries kind of mop up behind us. If people really felt like they needed a standard definition, well, sure, let them wait 5, 10, 15 years for the OED to get around to it. Then it'll be fine. Then it will be standardized. But then we can deal with all the words that are still in flux. We're like, okay, great, let's go. So in 2008, we incorporated Wordnik, which is what this turned into. And we started out with sentences. And kind of towards the end, we're like, okay, we can't actually call ourselves a dictionary without having any definitions. And one of my investors, Steve Anderson, said this really, really smart thing. He's like, you know, driving a car, it's actually, you have actually better control with like the same kind of joystick that you would use to steer a plane. But people are used to steering wheels. So if you had a car with a joystick, people would freak out because they imagine that cars have to be steered with a steering wheel. So let's put some definitions up there so people don't freak out. So we have definitions for words for which we have definitions, which is circular. And then we just show sentences for everything else that we can find a sentence for. And then we thought, let's go one step further. So if you look up a word in a traditional dictionary and it's not there, you don't know why. It could be because they didn't get around to putting it in yet, which is probably the most likely. It could be that for some reason you have the word wrong and that maybe it's spelled a different way and there's no cross-reference. Maybe you just thought you heard something that you didn't actually hear and the word doesn't exist. But you don't know why. So if you look something up, if your cat walks across the keyboard and manages to hit enter at the end of it, we'll show you a page for whatever you type in. And if there's no sentences, if there are no dictionary definitions, if there are no pictures from Flickr, if there are no tweets from Twitter, at the very bottom of the page you'll see a little stats section that'll say this word has been looked up exactly one time, you're the first. So at least you'll get some data about, is anybody else looking at this word? It gives some kind of social reinforcement about the life of that word. And that's actually the thing that I'm happiest about, is that nobody ever has to wonder. Always just look something up and we'll tell you whatever we've got. Because we think people are a lot better now at analyzing data. People have better critical thinking skills. They don't need a dictionary editor like me to say, this is what this word means, yay. You can look at all the evidence yourself and come to your own conclusion, because I like to treat adults like adults. So we went live with Wordnik in 2008 and have been working on it ever since. But as we got bigger, in terms of number of words, so we have about 7 million words available on Wordnik. We call them pretty words. If we have one piece of data for a word that we think is good data, like a good sentence, somebody's left a good comment, there's a dictionary definition, there's a synonym, we call it a pretty word. We have probably 3 or 4 times as many pieces of data, but 7 million pretty words. We started to see that we have a lot of information about the connections between words, like how are cat and dog related? Okay, we know that. But, you know, how is cat and earth moving machine related? Oh, okay, well, brand name, right? And this kind of data and concept knowledge, we're like, okay, well, what do we do with this? It's like we were building this map of the whole English language and where the coordinates of every word are. And then we thought, oh, okay, well, once you have a map of the English language, you can start to give directions. So we can know about relationships between sets of words, and sets of words tend to show up in places like blog posts and articles. So now we can say how 2 bigger groups of words, like a blog post and another blog post, are related. So we built a plugin for blogs called Related Content by Wordnik, and we use that technology to show how these things are related. And when I started working on dictionaries, I never thought, okay, yeah, actually blog post stuff. But it kind of worked out in a weird way, in that I've been blogging since 2005. And I have a very moribund blog about dictionaries that I don't really update very much anymore, because it just moves too fast. But I have a fairly active blog that I've been doing since 2005 about dresses, because my hobby is sewing and I love to make clothes. Only dresses. Pants are way too much trouble. So the blog is called Dress a Day. And when we first started making this blog plugin, I was like, great, I can be my own guinea pig. And so we installed the plugin on my blog, and it works pretty well. And it's kind of fun to see this technology show up in a part of my life that I thought was fairly separate. In fact, for a long time, the dictionary me and the blog me were so separate that I got an email one day from a woman in Bath, England, who wanted to send me a link to a dress store in Bath that she said, oh, look at this beautiful window they have, you should really blog about this. And I was like, oh, great. And the email was from a woman that I knew was from the American Dialect Society. And so I replied to her like, hey, so great to hear from you. Are you going to be at the meeting in January? And she freaked out because she was like, I thought that they were two separate Erins. I thought that Erin of the American Dialect Society was, the dictionary person, and the Erin of a Dress a Day was the dress person. And now my worlds have collided. And that was kind of fun. And so I have been writing about dresses since 2005, and I have to say that there are two things that I think have really helped in that. I never thought as a dictionary editor that I would have ever found a startup. It's not on the path. As far as I know, I'm the only dictionary editor to have started a startup. I may be the only venture back to lexicographer in the world. And which I think that there should be more of us, but it's not something I've never done before. And when you're working on a startup, it's like almost all of your self-worth is like wrapped up in making this thing work. And it's really stressful. And every day there's a new problem. And there's a famous quote about lexicography about how relaxing it is, because every day there's an evolving problem that's actually kind of small and you can make progress every day. And I look at that quote sometimes and I think that is so not a startup. Like every day in a startup, there's an enormous problem and you don't know how much progress you're going to make. And you don't go to the quote about lexicography has that, you can go to sleep with the feeling of like the work being advanced towards its completion. Nobody who works on a startup goes to sleep with the feeling of the work being advanced towards its completion. They're like, what the heck? So having this other outlet about writing about dresses, which is not very startup-y at all, has been really helpful. And a friend of mine, Rose White, once said that she once tweeted, in fact, that any sufficiently advanced hobby is indistinguishable from a job. Like if you do something in-depth enough, like bread baking for you, it stops being a hobby and turns it into a job. And so at the same time as I was working on this startup, when I left Oxford, I was like, I'm thinking about doing this startup. I really need to leave and commit to it. But I'm going to sound crazy if I tell them, like, this is what I'm going to do. But you can leave any job in publishing by saying that you're going off to write a novel. It's like your get out of publishing free card. And so I was like, so I should do that. Like, of course I should write a novel while working on a startup. How hard could they both be to juggle? So on the blog, I had started writing these little fictional things called The Secret Lives of Dresses, where I would tell a story from the point of view of a dress. And I got some interest from people who wanted to turn it into a book, but I didn't want to turn it into a book of short stories because I knew enough from working in publishing to know that books of short stories never sell. They just don't. Like, they win awards, not if you write about dresses. They win awards and they get you good cred, but they don't sell. So I was like, I'm going to turn it into a novel. And they were like, sure, fine, whatever. So then I had a book contract and a startup, and I was like, yeah, let's go. And it was crazy, don't do it. But luckily the novel came out in 2011 from Grand Central, from Hodder in Australia and the UK. And I did really well in Australia for reasons I had absolutely no insight into. But it's awesome to sell a lot of books in Australia because then you can put international bestseller after your name, even if it's like, all you need is one country. That's not the country you live in. And then, yeah, international bestseller. It's awesome. And it was really cool because I got to go to Melbourne last year about this time, and like, I was going to talk to the Australian teachers of English. And then my publisher found out I was going, and I was like, you have to do some kind of book event. So I got to go to this great vintage store and meet a lot of cool people who all dressed up and looked awesome. You know how sometimes when people talk about the pain of childbirth, that you forget it, and that's why people have second children? I only have one child, but I have another book. So I obviously forgot the pain of writing a book. Because I worked on books in publishing before, but either I was the editor, or if they were little books, they were about words, so it felt like dictionary-ish. And so it didn't feel like a real book. But I was working on another book that comes out next June from Bloomsbury called The 100 Dresses. And so the novel was kind of rough to work on. And was like, I need a little nonfiction book to like ease off. And so the 100 Dresses is about dress archetypes. So like if you wear a flapper dress, like we know what the iconic flapper dress is. And we know kind of what the flapper dress means, right? It's young and it's fun and it's a little countercultural, although not so much anymore. Or it means that you're at a costume party, right? Because the things that a flapper dress means are fairly set. In the same way that we know what certain brands mean when people wear them, we know what certain styles of dress mean when people wear them. So, as far as I'm concerned, there are 100 of them, unless I decide to do a sequel, in which case there will be 200 of them. And so that book comes out next June. And the kind of trying to balance the book and dress part with the dictionary and tech part makes me really happy because I think if I didn't have the excuse of the blog and books, then I probably wouldn't wear a dress to work every day. But when you name your blog a dress a day, people are pissed off if you show up in pants. I pretty much have not worn trousers, slacks, or jeans since 2007-ish. I can count like 3 times in the past year I've worn jeans, and once involved trampolines and once involved fake skydiving. And I probably could have worn a dress for the fake skydiving because it gave me a good rub. Not so much for the trampoline. And one day we all dressed up in the office as one of the other guys, and he traditionally wears jeans. So I actually had to go out and buy a pair of jeans to dress up like someone in the office. But yeah, if you have a blog out dress today and show up jeans, people are pissed off, like you let them down. But it's nice to, especially if you work in an environment that's mostly men, to like show up and be like, yeah, I'm gonna wear a dress every day. And it's just what I do. And it's like, it's nice to kind of put that otherness out there. And it gives you an excuse to be different in other ways. Like, you know, you can say, this is how we're gonna do things. And it's not the traditional way of doing it. And this is just how it's gonna be. I'm usually pretty bad at doing things, telling people to do things for the because I said so reason, but that gives a little extra armor for doing it. One of the times this has come up is that the Wordnik logo, I've got some pens to give away, the Wordnik logo has a heart in it in place of the O. And we used to have a logo that didn't have a heart in it. And when we changed the logo, I got an email from somebody who was like, I don't like the new logo, it's too girly. I was like, duh, girl. Like, that is not an argument that is going to, carry any water with me whatsoever. Like, yeah, girl logo, live with it. And, so, it's fun to do. And it's also kind of gives me a platform from which to say, it's okay to be girly. Like, I don't think anybody should ever have to be girly. Probably the most popular post on my blog is one that's called "You Don't Have to Be Pretty," and I'm excited lately to see. Like, I set up a Twitter search because all sorts of people started coming to the blog post and leaving comments. It's like, oh, I found you on Twitter. So I set up a Twitter search for "You Don't Have to Be Pretty," and a lot of them are "You don't have to be pretty to be a model," which I don't know if that's true. But as far as I can see, it's a qualification. But right now, there's a quote from the blog post that is now being attributed to Diana Vreeland, because at the top of the blog, of that particular post, I have a big picture of Diana Vreeland, because I think she was someone who was not traditionally pretty, and she became this fashion maven, and she was renowned for her fashion sense, and she was not a pretty person. She was striking, she was unusual, she was stylish, but she was not pretty. And so now, because there's a big picture of Diana Vreeland at the top of that blog post, the quote from the blog post is being attributed to Diana Vreeland everywhere, which I think is awesome. There's this linguistic thing called Churchillian drift. Do you guys know what this is? It's the tendency of any quote over time to be attributed to Winston Churchill, no matter who said it. Because, like, he's a guy that could say fun things, and he could say profound things, and he's important, and everybody looks up to him. So if you want to have a quotation have some heft, you might as well put Winston's name on the end of it. In the United States, that phenomenon also happens with Mark Twain. Like, any time somebody says something funny, it gets attributed to Mark Twain. And anytime somebody says something kind of vaguely political, it gets attributed to Lincoln, right? So it's kind of like borrowing authority to put behind your quote. So I'm like, yeah, this is awesome. Other people have now attributed that I agree with authority. But I don't think it's obligatory to be pretty, and I often get pissed off when other women entrepreneurs sort of criticize, like, not stylish enough. Like, every once in a while, people will write an article about women in tech and be like, wow, they know how to wear scarves. And I'm like, that is the dumbest thing ever. Everybody knows how to wear a scarf. It's not something to judge people on. But I think also the opposite is true, and that you shouldn't have to deny things that make you happy, like bright colored lipstick, if they make you happy. Like, they shouldn't take points off from your tech geek cred to do stuff like this. I mean, you can see this with guys in tech jobs a lot as well. You know, if somebody wants to wear fancy socks or a shiny tie or cool shoes, it doesn't automatically make their coding suspect, right? There is the stereotype of the t-shirted, the jeaned engineer who, cares about nothing but code, but they have a lot more latitude. So I think it's fun to try and be an outlier if it means that I broaden the spread of what people are considered appropriate to do. Also, I like to make stun dresses. Like, I have a dress that's the Tetris blocks falling, and like, you can print fabric on spoonflower.com, and I have a lot of dresses with alphabet prints because, for obvious reasons, and I always am looking for some way to have an excuse to make a dress that I will probably only wear once. But you never know. I made a dress once with fabric that I bought in Beijing that had tiny little Darth Vader heads on it. I'm totally sure it was licensed. But I was like, okay, I have to buy this fabric because when am I ever going to find Darth Vader head print silk again? And so I bought some. I didn't buy enough. Someone who read my blog was going to Beijing and offered to buy me more and like mail me it. I was like, great. So I made a dress that's it's like a kimono style dress, like a duro. It has contrasting bands at the neck, the sleeves, and the waist. But the main fabric is little Darth Vader heads. What I love about it is you can't really tell it's Darth Vader until you get pretty close. Because like from a distance, it just looks like gray spots and black fabric. And that actually has been a lot more versatile in terms of wear than I thought. I managed to wear that quite a bit. And not to like Star Wars conventions either. I've never been. Anyway, I can ramble on about dictionaries and goofy stuff and startups and so forth all day, but if anybody had questions, I'm happy to ramble on as I answer those as well. Thank you for
what do you think of like curated dictionaries, like urban dictionaries? People like post their own words and their own definitions of words.
Yeah, so I love Urban Dictionary. The guy who runs that is also named Aaron, like AA. So I love Urban Dictionary because it covers this void in the data. So when we're looking at examples of language use, we're almost always, in fact 99.9% of the time, thinking about written language. But there's a lot of language that is only spoken. And the boundaries are getting a little fuzzier because people will tweet things that feel like spoken language, they'll blog things that feel like spoken language. But Urban Dictionary is a place where people can go and record words as they say them, and not have to rely just on written language, because a lot of the stuff in Urban Dictionary I don't think gets written down in a lot of different places. The converse is, of course, there's no kind of citation-ness of it. So you don't know whether somebody is truthfully reporting a use of the word that they hear all the time, or whether they are trying to insult someone else in their 5th grade classroom. Like, it could be both, it could be either. So I feel like Urban Dictionary is an awesome resource, and I use it a lot. But if I really need to know, like, does this word exist in the wild, then I will look at other sources as well. They're fun.
I have a question about dresses.
Oh, sure.
When you say you make dresses, do you actually stitch them or do you design them?
In fact, I stitch them more than I design them. So I use mostly commercial patterns, mostly vintage commercial patterns from like the 50s. I very rarely design a dress from scratch. And even if I do, I'm pretty lazy when it comes to drafting patterns, so I will Frankenstein like the bodice of one pattern to the skirt of another pattern and just kind of try and make it work. I enjoy the putting togetherness of a dress and trying to do the matchmaking between will this fabric look good in this style and can I add pockets? Like my number one question is, can there be pockets? And if there can't be pockets, I won't make it. But I think I've never actually seen Project Runway for two reasons. One is that I know I would become obsessed, and I just don't have time for more obsessions. They're like I have an obsession reading this that's like this big. And the other reason is I feel like there's pressure for people who enjoy making things to become designers. And I feel like we don't spend enough time thinking about just making something for the pleasure of making it. And I don't usually sew for other people. I think I've made things for other people 2 or 3 times. Mostly because they're not with me at every step of the process. They're usually at the visualization stage and the end product stage. And they don't see all the little course corrections that come when you make something. So I feel like they are inevitably disappointed. Because the visualization is almost always much better than the execution. And it's hard. I'm not a good artist, so the sketching doesn't work very well for me. So I will say, yeah, it will have this kind of skirt and this kind of bodice and be this color, and then the finished product comes out, and they're like, this is not what I expected at all, but at least there are pockets. So yes, I prefer to make rather than design. It's more like a sewing engineer rather than a sewing architect.
This is interesting.
I hardly encourage people to sew them. It's not that hard. If you can drive a car and you can follow a recipe, you can sew. Because you just need to be able to work a foot pedal and do things in order. That's really all this takes.
So, out of curiosity, how did you sew?
Oh, I learned to sew when I was 12. I was really picky about my clothes as a preteen, like even pickier than most like tween girls. And my mom got really tired of me dragging her around the mall, going, I hate that, I hate that, I hate that, I hate that. And so she's like, well, let's learn how to sew. So we picked out together a pattern and 2 pieces of fabric. And so she made it the first time, and one fabric would be watching, and I made it the second time, and the second fabric with her watching. And then she was like, fine, the sewing machine's yours, go. She had to learn how to sew growing up. Her college actually forced everyone to learn how to sew, and I think the more you're forced to do something, the less you actually like to do it. She made her own wedding dress, which was beautiful, very 1960s with mini skirt wedding dress. And, but basically after that, I just made less and less boxy dresses over a longer and longer period of time. Like, the first things I made were like, here's one square, let's put it on top of another square. Great, let's go. And I've gotten more in the 30-ish, almost 30 years since that, more into, I guess, less about can I make it in 2 hours so I can wear it tonight, but more about the process of doing it. There's still some make it in 2 hours.
So you feel like it sounds like you're describing as well.
Yeah, process always happens. Like, at the beginning, you can just be like, let's throw stuff against the wall and see what sticks. But then once something sticks, you want to replicate it. That's like science, right? It's not science if you can't reproduce it. And of course, we all like to think that we're scientists. So let's figure out what to do. Let's figure out how to make it better. Let's figure out what we want it to do instead of just figuring out will it work at all, and then go from there. Now I tend to find one pattern that I like and make it over and over again until I'm sick of it. Like just different fabrics, trying to figure out all the different variations that the pattern can make. Like I made 4 of this dress in different fabrics, which is how I learned that you need to make the pockets 3 inches deeper after the first one. Because if you want, you can fit a whole Moleskine book, which is really useful. But not if the pockets are too short. Because then when you ride your bike, it falls out. If the pockets are too short. Anyways.
What is your vision for Wordnik going forward, like in the next couple of years?
Oh, thank you for asking that. So for Wordnik, right now you have to go to Wordnik and look something up. But I really feel like the information about what words mean should be a layer of actionable information on top of the text everywhere. Like anywhere you're reading something, you should be able to invoke information about what the word means. And you can do this in some things right now. On Kindle, you can touch a word and get a definition. But the Kindle dictionary only has about, generously speaking, 400,000 words in it. And we've already got 7 million words in Wordnik, so you can think about, and of course, there's a zip feed distribution, so the most frequent words in English you're bound to be able to look up. But people don't look up the most frequent words in English. They look up the new ones and the unusual ones. So the chances of a word being in a dictionary and the chances of you wanting to look it up, go opposite directions. I feel like it's the dream of hypertext that we should make real, that on top of any text there are all these references and allusions and definitions and places and maps and people, and you should be able to invoke a layer on top of text and get that view, get that kind of 3D heads up, Tom Cruise in the Philip K. Dick movie view on everything that you read. And I may die before this happens, especially if I keep riding my bike in San Francisco. I got hit by a car last week, so it's a little top of mind. But it should happen. You shouldn't have to go someplace else to look something up. It should come to you. That's what the internet is all about, bringing stuff to you.
I really like to add about integrating people because that's the piece which would be immediately useful because if I'm using it on the computer, I'm more inclined to even Google it up. But on a device, that should be the only resource.
Oh Lord, we tried so hard. For about 9 months, we tried really hard to be inside of e-readers, but I think we were just too early. E-readers are still trying to figure out how do they actually work? How do we get people to use them? And they're not really thinking about how do we make the dictionary better. It's not quite where they're at. But when they're ready, we will be here. We have an open API with Wordnik at developer.wordnik.com. We have about 8,000 developers signed up to use it. They're mostly making things so that you cheat at Words with Friends. But we would like people to make more stuff. And also flashcards for learning words. There's a lot of GRE studying going on all across the universe. But we have, the thing I like best about our APIs is that we think of them as a tool and we want to make it easy to use tools. So we have this API description framework called Spider. And basically, it's a self-documenting API. If you go to developer.wordnik.com, especially if you're a newbie developer like I am, you can see the API call, all of the necessary parameters. You can tweak all the little buttons, get an example response, get the Wordnik Ruby gem Wordnik Ruby call, and the whole API set out for you, copy and paste. Because I feel like the most frustrating thing working with APIs is what parameters are obligatory, what parameters are optional, all the documentation is gray fuzz in your vision. So why not make a sandbox to make it easy for people so that they can get what they want? Sorry, the developer ran.
Do you learn programming? At this time building Wordnik, so programming?
I used to be a really horrible Perl hacker, because we could never afford a real programmer, and we would just have these big XML files of dictionary data that needed to be turned into slightly smaller XML files of dictionary data. So let's read everything into an array, let's run a regex over everything in the array and spit it out again. But never any front-end web development, which is what I really want, what I'm working on learning now, because it's fun to mess with. And also, I just feel in the modern world, regex, I don't use it as often as I used to. I still use it a lot, but I'd much rather make things that people can interact with instead of just kind of munching data on that. So I had to unlearn a lot of really bad habits that come when you teach yourself Perl from a book. And this is before the internet. I had a print subscription to a Perl magazine, a Perl journal. It would come in the mail, and I would read stuff. Yeah, you kids with your Stack Overflow, you don't know you don't know how easy you have it. I had to walk uphill the snow both ways to,
How is it trying to get tech coming from the non-technical perspective?
It helps to be a big geek. It helps to really enjoy technology. If your eyes glaze over when people start talking about the differences between NoSQL and SQL databases, then I think it's harder. But we have an open plan office, and I sit kind of in the center of a lot of really kick-ass engineers, and I learned so much by just having it flow past me. And also, they don't mind if I stop and say, "What do you mean Scala has a future?" And like, okay, explain that to me. And then it's awesome. And it turns out that I once was working with a language called Omnimark that had that same concept. And we used it to populate dictionary definition numbers. It's like, if you have the first definition and there's no second definition, you don't put a number 1 there. But you can, once you get to number 2, you can go back and fill in number 1. Anyway, so it's like, it's fun to ask questions. If you have this idea that like all of this stuff is fascinating and you want to learn as much of it as you can, then it goes really wow. And also I think it helps to know that like it's not enough to have an idea. Like, I don't know if people have seen that Onion parody of the TED Talk where the guy's like, here's my idea, you make it happen. I kind of feel almost that way with my TED Talk. I was like, here's this idea, but without Tony Tam, who was my technical co-founder, who's now the CEO of Wordnik, nothing would have happened. So really, as a founder, your job is to persuade everybody else that your idea is a good one so much that they help you build it. And without knowing at every step of the way that your company is only as good as the people who believe in it with you, and that those people are highly technical, like without respecting them, nothing's going to happen. And besides, engineers are just more fun. We spend a lot of time shooting off darts, Nerf darts in the office, and making random side bets on everything. That's fun to do.
How big is Wordnik?
We're about 23 people. Yeah. How do we make money? Awesome question. So we are in a pre-revenue stage right now, but the idea is that by knowing how groups of words are related, we can show things that are really, really relevant to you wherever you are. So when you're reading somebody's blog, and the 3 related blog posts that we show are so relevant to what you're reading that you click through and read more, that drives engagement. And engagement is the driver of value for most people who have content on the web. It's not enough to have people pulled in by a flashy headline about Jennifer Aniston, right? They don't stick. You want people to be your devoted, true fans and think of you as the source of relevant content. And we make things more relevant. We make things more meaningful in a way because of all the meaning that we know about. So it's fun to do. We also power some glossaries right now for smart money for the Wall Street Journal. So anytime there's a Wall Street Journal article, a smart money article, we can analyze the whole text of the page on the fly the first time it loads for the very first reader, figure out which of the words in the article should be highlighted as important to the meaning of the article, populate a box at the bottom that says, go here for the smart money glossary, and then send people to that glossary page that we also constructed. And it's all done with blocking JavaScript, so it's kind of cool on the back end. We have this other framework called Atmosphere, which basically is like WebSocket goodness, and makes things really fast. So they pay us for that, which is nice of them. So I'm right over time. We're right at 8 o'clock. But I'm happy to answer more questions and also give you guys Wordnik shorts.
Do you have some favorite words?
Oh, you're not really supposed to have favorites, but Wordnik lets you favorite words. So now I have like 100 some, maybe more words that are my favorites. And every once in a while, I like to go back and look at all the words that I've marked as a favorite. So if you're logged in as a Wordnik user, you can, there's a little link at the top that says love. And when you love a word, hearts appear around it for girl. And yeah, girl, right? And then it automatically goes on your favorites list. And then whenever you're thinking like, oh, okay, well, what was that word? You can go check your favorites list. And you can also make topical lists or just lists of things you like. I have a list that's all the different kinds of words that end in punk, like steampunk, cyberpunk. And we have like almost 40,000, maybe more than 40,000 lists of words that people have created on the site right now. And we do a list of the day on Twitter. My favorite list is the Sweet Tooth Fairy list. So if you have Sweet Tooth and you have Tooth Fairy, if you smush those phrases together, you get Sweet Tooth Fairy. which is like a different thing, right? I actually went as a sweet tooth fairy for Halloween this year. It's basically like fairy babies in a Wordnik t-shirt, but the like free throw and throw rug. Free throw rug. My favorite one is Faraday cage. You know what a Faraday cage is? It like keeps electronic signals from going in and out. Lead, like putting something in lead shielding. So Faraday cage and cage match is Faraday cage match, right? So there are thousands of these in this list, and it's an open list, so anyone can contribute to it. So you can go to the Sweet Tooth Fairy list, and like any two-word phrase that has an overlapping word, switch them together. Like t-shirt and shirt sleeves, like t-shirt sleeves. That's actually a thing. So you get extra points if it's like funny, and you get extra points if it's funny. But of course, the points are only internal in your head. That's probably one of my favorite parts of Wordnik is that when I was working on traditional dictionaries, there was no customer interaction at all. Like I made a physical book, and then 6 months later, I would get a letter pointing out something that was wrong. Like that was the extent of the interaction. And now, every day, somebody emails me something like, "This is what I did on Wordnik. It's awesome. Thank you." Or, "Boy, you guys really screwed this up. Fix it now." And that's equally awesome because it can get better. People don't tell us what. Also, the people who send us feedback now don't generally typewrite it on typewriters where the ribbon is like 50 years out of date. I used to get letters from the dictionary where the typewriting was so faked. I was like, have to run over it with a graphite pencil to like read that. Much higher quality of commerce now. Anyways, thank you so much for hosting me today. I really had fun collaborating.
Thank you.